you'd only been in the Major Crimes Division for 2 years, right?
That's correct. I was recently promoted.
Right, and part of those 2 years, you were still completing training to be a detective, right?
I had completed my training already. That's why I was promoted.
Right, but in 2017, you underwent some additional training when you were promoted to the Major Crimes Division, right?
Yes, we're always undergoing training to refine our techniques.
Right, and you only underwent basic training for investigating homicides, right?
I underwent investigative training for major crimes. That's why I'm in the Major Crimes Division.
Thank you, Detective, but that wasn't my question. You underwent basic training for investigating homicides, right?
I went through detective school. It was 40 hours.
All right, Detective, now I want to talk about today's case. You started your investigation with someone by the name of Corbin Dallas, correct?
That's correct. That was the complaint.
And upon arriving to the residence of Corbin Dallas, you saw that there were signs that they were intoxicated, right?
That's correct.
And you used the information that Corbin Dallas gave you to start your investigation, right?
That's correct. At the time, the primary concern was finding the missing child.
And that was even though Corbin Dallas told you that they couldn't remember whether or not Miss Ryder had told them where they were going.
Objection, Your Honor, is to hearsay by statements of Corbin Dallas.
Your Honor, if I may be heard.
Yes.
Your Honor, these statements are not being offered for the truth of the matter asserted. It's rather to show the detective's subsequent actions after receiving this information by Corbin Dallas.
So the statement at issue is that that Corbin indicated that he couldn't recall
Yes,
if
Your Honor.
the decedent had told him where they were going.
Right, Your Honor, and that is only being used to show the subsequent actions of the defendant after hearing this information.
Yes.
Response, Your Honor? No foundation has been laid as to what the subsequent actions of Detective Chesney were. Subsequent actions is not a catch-all term to apply in this case. They are simply using this for the truth of the matter asserted that Corbin Dallas did not know the whereabouts of the defendant and her daughter. They're using this for the truth asserted.
Your Honor, if I may respond.
Yes.
First and foremost, this is cross-examination. No additional foundation needs to be laid. But if I may proffer, I'm going to get into the steps that Detective Chesney made next.
Your objection's overruled.
Now, Detective, Corbin Dallas told you that they couldn't remember if my client had told them where they were going, right?
That's right. Corbin Dallas couldn't provide us with much information about the whereabouts of Parker Page until he gave us access to that cell phone tracking software.
Right, but he didn't even remember about that software until 2 hours later, right?
That's right. And I reminded Mr. Dallas that information like that is of the utmost importance when we're trying to locate a missing child.
Thank you, Detective. But with that information, you still decided to issue an alert for a missing child, right?
That's right. At the time, the child was still missing.
All right, and your investigation led you to Calkins Campground, right?
It did.
And that's where you met Miss Jordan Ryder, right?
Correct.
And when you found Miss Ryder, you said on direct examination that she was asleep. Do I have that right?
She was asleep.
Right, but you aren't sure the circumstances to which she fell asleep, are you?
No, I had just arrived.
Detective, you aren't sure whether or not Miss Ryder had passed out?
No.
And you never asked her if she had passed out, right?
No.
Now, Detective, you also said something on direct examination that Miss Ryder was jumbling her words when you started to speak to her, right?
She was.
But Detective, just so I have this right, you started questioning her only moments after you shook her awake, right?
I did not make any physical contact with Miss Ryder initially.
Well, you started questioning her immediately after she woke up, right?
I identified myself as Midland Center Police Department. She identified herself as Jordan Ryder after I asked her who she was. And then I asked her the whereabouts of her daughter.
Right, and this was moments after she was brought to consciousness, right?
A few moments after, yes.
And Detective, you'd agree with me that Miss Ryder was trying to answer your questions, right?
She was trying.
Right, and you still threatened to call her parole officer, correct?
That's right. It took her a while to eventually tell me that her daughter was missing.
Right, so you threatened to call Miss Ryder's parole officer when she was trying to answer your questions, yes or no?
She was trying to, and yes, I did mention that we could get in contact with her parole officer if she decided to not cooperate.
All right, Detective, now I want to walk through your investigation a little bit more. When you arrived to Calkins Campground, you spoke to someone by the name of Armani Rodriguez, right?
Yes, the campsite director.
And this individual gave you a list of registered guests on July 14th, right?
Correct.
But Detective, you'd agree with me that this list doesn't eliminate the possibility of there being unidentified guests at Calkins Campground that weekend.
That's right. I was only there that day, and there could have been people who came before.
Right, and Calkins Campground, it doesn't have a fence surrounding it, right?
Not when we arrived, we didn't.
There's no security patrolling the area.
As far as I'm aware, no.
So anyone could have just walked onto Calkins Campground, right?
I suppose so.
Now, you also mentioned something about a cafe on direct examination.
Yes,
That was Remy Mouchard's cafe, right?
that's correct.
And you said that you collected evidence from Miss Mouchard,
I did, a cell phone.
but detective, you didn't seek out that evidence. It came to you, right?
Well, when we were there at Calkins Campground, the whole reason why we were there was because Parker Page's cell phone had pinged off of that location. So my officers and I spent a considerable amount of time looking for that cell phone, and we could not locate it.
You never asked Miss Ryder about that cell phone, though, did you?
Well, we asked Miss Ryder the whereabouts of her daughter, and she couldn't tell us that.
Thank you, detective, but that wasn't my question. You never asked Miss Ryder about this cell phone that led you to Calkins Campground, did you?
No.
Right, you didn't even get that cell phone until someone else reached out to you about it, right?
That's right. Oftentimes in investigations, we get things that come to us when we put out the word that we're looking for tips.
All right, we're gonna come back to that cell phone in just a moment, but I also want to talk to you about some things you said on direct examination about this napkin. Detective, when you interrogated Miss Ryder, you never asked her why she wrote what she wrote on this napkin, did you?
No, I didn't.
She never got the chance to explain herself, right?
No. When I started asking her about this note, about the insurance policy, that's when she decided that she wanted to speak to a lawyer.
All right, detective. Now back to that phone that I mentioned. You found some messages on that cell phone, right?
That's correct.
You recognize some of them? I showed you them today in court.
Yes.
Your Honor, may I approach opposing counsel and the witness with what's been marked as Exhibit 27?
Yes.
Would Your Honor like a courtesy copy?
Thank you.
Detective, these are some messages from Parker Page's phone, right?
That's correct.
Is this a fair and accurate depiction of those messages?
Yes.
Do they appear to be altered in any way?
No.
Your Honor, at this time, per stipulations, I'd like to move Exhibit 27 into evidence.
Per stipulations, no objections. Will be received.
Now, Detective, these messages are addressed to someone by the name of Kennedy, right?
Yes, that's what it says.
And Detective, nowhere in your investigation did you include anything about an individual by the name of Kennedy, right?
No.
You never thought to do a background check on this individual?
No.
You never called them in for questioning?
There was no need to. We had no indication that Kennedy was connected really in any way.
Well, Miss Page was in contact with Kennedy on the day that she died, right?
Yes.
Her last message was sent at 4:38 p.m. to this Kennedy person, right?
That's what it says, yes.
And Detective, if I'm looking at this, Parker Page makes reference to the trails in these messages, right?
I suppose that's what she was talking about.
So Detective, even though you knew that Parker Page was in contact with somebody on the day she died, you never questioned them?
No. Once again, by the time we received these messages a week later, we had enough evidence to already pin Jordan Ryder for the murder of her daughter.
Even though you didn't question this individual?
That's right. We had sufficient evidence already.
Even though still today, you have no idea who this Kennedy person is?
Once again, we had enough evidence already at the time.
All right, Detective, you can set that to the side if you like. Got one last thing I want to cover here. You started your investigation on July 15th, 2018, right?
That's correct.
And you completed your investigation on July 28th, 2018, right?
Yes.
Now, Detective, correct me if I'm wrong, but that means that you opened and closed a murder investigation in 13 days, right?
That's right.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Honor. I have no further questions at this time.
Any redirect?
No, Your Honor. We just asked that Detective Chesney be allowed to step down.
Very well. You may step down. Thank you.
And Your Honor, at this time, when we publish Exhibits 7, 25, and 26, as well as 17 to the jury.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Woolman.
And Your Honor, before the next witness is called, we'd like to read something regarding the testimony of Detective Chesney that was just said on the stand. According to case law, State v. Crosby, criminal defendants have a constitutionally protected right to refuse to speak with police officers and decline to testify in their own defense. No prosecutor or witness may comment, expressly or implicitly, on a defendant's exercise to either of either right to suggest that their refusal to testify or termination of a police investigation demonstrates a consciousness of guilt.
Very well, thank you.
Your Honor, at this time,
At this time, I need to finish scoring.
sorry, Your Honor, may I set the
I'll
will?
let you know when we're ready to move on. But if you need to set up for your examination, you may do so.
Thank you, Your Honor.
The down sign to presiding and scoring.
Yes.
Good. Now you may call your next witness.
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, this prosecution calls Kelly Deuce to the stand. Good morning, Mr. Deuce. Could you please introduce yourself to the jury?
Well, sure. Hi, my name is Kelly Hughes. It's a pleasure to meet all of you.
What do you do for a living?
I'm what my grandson likes to call a social media influencer. That's the one. I make crocheting videos of me in exotic places. You know, I've done the top of the Empire State Building. I tried to do the needle in Seattle, but they didn't like that much. But I just like doing crocheting everywhere.
Mr. Deuce, how are you involved in today's case?
Well, I actually went to Calkins Campground because I heard they had some nice views, so I was planning on making some videos while I was there.
Did you meet anyone while you were there?
Yeah, I met Miss Ryder and her daughter.
Mr. Deuce, we can talk about your interactions with the defendant and her daughter in just a moment, but I want to talk about how that weekend went for you. How did that weekend start?
Well, sure. Okay, so I woke up real early on the 14th, so I could, get an early start. So I got to the campground, didn't really see anyone around, but I grabbed a map and decided that I'd go hiking for the day, find the perfect spot.
When did you first see the defendant and her daughter?
Well, I ended up hiking Lectone Loop, and I actually ran into them while I was hiking that trail.
Where did you run into them?
Well, in order to get to this Calkins Rock, you have to walk along this cliff face to get to an overlook. So there's this cliff to your left as you're walking by, and I saw them right at the edge of that cliff.
Mr. Deuce, would you recognize a picture of that cliff?
I think so, yeah, of course.
Your Honor, permission to approach Mr. Deuce with a picture of Exhibit 7.
Yes.
Showing opposing counsel. Handing to Mr. Deuce. Mr. Deuce, is that where you saw the defendant and her daughter?
Yeah, this is exactly it.
Your Honor, permission to put up a blown-up version of Exhibit 7 and for Mr. Deuce to step down and interact with it.
Yes.
Yes.
Mr. Deuce, you can come down here.
All right.
And now, Mr. Deuce, I'm going to hand you a red dot. If you could place on this picture where exactly you saw the defendant and her daughter.
Oh, well, sure. So you have to walk along it right around here. So I saw them right next to this rock, right about there, if I remember correctly.
Mr. Deuce has placed.
Point of order, Your Honor. Oh, I believe the opposing counsel was just about to proceed with that. My apologies.
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Deuce has placed a dot at the edge of the cliff in the middle of the picture. Now,
Yes.
Mr. Deuce.
Did you wish to say anything?
I was going to point of order that it be reflected on the record, but opposing counsel did that.
All right.
Mr. Deuce, what were the defendant and her daughter doing at the edge of this cliff?
Well, the first time I walked by, they were arguing something fierce about this hiking stick that the little girl seemed real attached to.
Would you recognize the hiking stick?
Yeah, I think so.
Take that back from me. You're on permission to approach Mr. Deuce with Exhibit 17.
Yes.
Mr. Deuce, could you show the jury what Parker was doing with that hiking stick?
Oh, well, sure. So she was favoring one leg and leaning on it kind of like this with one leg up in the air.
What did the defendant do with that hiking stick?
Could you hold this like I just was? Okay, so if you're the little girl and I'm Miss Ryder, So they were arguing back and forth a little bit, but then Ms. Ryder just kind of lunged forward and yanked it out of her daughter's hand. The little girl actually almost fell down, but she caught herself with a bad foot.
What did the defendant do after yanking